The gray ceiling of the world had collapsed long before the structures of Seattle followed suit, but the rain remained constant, a persistent slick varnish coating the necropolis in a sheen of eternal misery. Behdala crouched beneath the twisted rebar-gnawed remains of the monorail track, the concrete above her weeping rusty tears onto her weathered tactical pauldron. Her breath hitched in her throat, a jagged shard of canic she refused to swallow, caught between the instinct to scream and the necessity of absolute suffocating silence. The air here, in the shadow of 4th Avenue, tasted of ozone, wet ash, and the copper tang of a civilization that had rotted from the inside out. She adjusted the strap of her rifle, the leather biting into her shoulder, a grounding sensation that reminded her she was still corporeal, still fighting, still the protagonist of this wretched nightmare. Every micro-movement was a calculation. The shifting of her weight caused the mud beneath her boots to squelch, a sound that roared like a cannon shot in the oppressive quiet. She froze. Her eyes, wide and laced with the red veins of exhaustion, darted toward the storefront across the street, a coffee shop once synonymous with comfort, now a gaping maw of shattered glass and shadows. Inside, movement, not the erratic scurrying of rats, but the heavy, dragging gait of the hollows. The talahum, the struggle, was imminent. She could feel the pressure of it in the air, a barometric drop preceding the violence. Behdala knew the geography of this city better than she knew the lines on her own palms, but the city had changed. It had evolved into a labyrinth of decaying metal and flesh. Above it all, piercing the gloom like a needle stitching the torn sky together, stood the Space Needle. It was silent, white, and impossibly distant, yet it was the only beacon left. The rumors whispered over dying radio frequencies claimed it was sealed, self-sustaining, a vertical fortress where the infection couldn't climb. The last safe place, the static had promised. Behdala didn't believe in safety, but she believed in high ground. She pushed herself up, her knees cracking in protest, the sound masked by a sudden roll of thunder that rattled the hollow rib cages of the abandoned skyscrapers. She moved. Her sprint was low, a tactical glide across the debris-strewn pavement, avoiding the puddles that reflected the burning crimson of distant fires. The atmosphere was thick, almost gelatinous, resisting her forward momentum. She hugged the wall of a bank, the cold stone seeping through her torn jacket. A low moan drifted on the wind, a chorus of the damned rising from the waterfront. They were migrating. The sensory overload was nearly paralyzing. The smell of wet rot was so potent it felt like a physical film on her tongue. She checked her magazine, 3 rounds left, a pathetic tally against the millions. She needed to cross the intersection of Pike and 4th, a kill box exposed from all angles. She took a breath, tasting the rain, and launched herself into the open. The world slowed. To her left, a figure emerged from the mist, its skin the color of bruised plums, jaw slack and unhinged. It didn't rush, it simply existed in her path, an obstacle of meat and malice. Behdala didn't stop, she didn't fire, she used the momentum, swinging the stock of her rifle in a brutal arc, connecting with the creature's collarbone with a sickening crunch of dry bone. The impact vibrated up her arms, a visceral shock that rattled her teeth. She spun, boots sliding on the slick asphalt, recovering her balance just as a second shadow detached itself from the gloom. This was the Talahum, the dance of survival. There was no glory here, only the desperate clawing grasp for one more second of life. She scrambled over the hood of a rusted sedan, the metal groaning under her weight, and dropped into the alleyway beyond. Darkness swallowed her whole. The only light came from the bioluminescent fungi beginning to sprout in the cracks of the brickwork, casting an eerie, sick green glow on the dumpster she huddled behind. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. She needed to reach the monorail station wreckage. It was an elevated path, a broken spine that led directly toward the needle. But the ascent would be exposed. She wiped the mixture of sweat and rain from her eyes, her hand trembling. The texture of her gloves was gritty with the dust of the fallen city. Every sense was dialed to 11. She heard the drip of water from a fire escape, the distant crash of a collapsing structure, the wet slap of footsteps approaching the alley mouth. They were hunting, not with intelligence, but with a relentless biological imperative. Behdala checked her knife, the blade dull and chipped. It would have to do. The atmosphere in the alley tightened, the shadows seemingly elongating, reaching for her. She looked up. Through a gap in the towering buildings, the saucer of the Space Needle hovered, illuminated by a stray beam of moonlight that pierced the storm clouds. It looked like a spaceship ready to depart a dying planet. "Just get to the base," she whispered, her voice cracking. "Just get to the needle." The words felt like a spell, a prayer to a god that had long since abandoned Seattle. She forced her muscles to unlock, rising from the crouch. The struggle was not just physical. It was the weight of the memories, the faces of those she lost, pressing down on her shoulders heavier than her pack. But the survival instinct was a cruel master, and it demanded motion. She began the climb, scaling the rusted ladder of the fire escape, the metal slick and freezing against her palms. Above her, the city sprawled out in a tapestry of destruction, beautiful in its horrific detail, a graveyard of millions waiting to be disturbed. The rusted metal groaned under her weight, a sound that seemed to echo like a gunshot across the silent, drowned city. Elena froze, her knuckles white against the freezing iron of the fire escape, her breath hitching in her throat. She waited for the inevitable reaction, the high-pitched, manic giggling that usually preceded the slaughter, or the dull, wet thud of felt feet hitting the pavement. But there was only the wind, howling through the skeleton of Seattle, carrying with it the scent of wet dog and old copper. She resumed the climb. Every rung was a battle against gravity and exhaustion. The Space Needle loomed ahead, a stark white exclamation point against the bruising purple of the storm clouds. It was no longer just a tourist trap or a relic of the World's Fair. It was the spire of the Watcher. The needle had changed, just as the city had. The saucer section seemed wider, the legs thicker, coated in a strange yellow lichen that pulsed with a faint bioluminescent rhythm. It was the only light source in a city that had gone dark weeks ago, a beacon calling the desperate and the damned. Reaching the roof of the tenement building, Elena rolled over the parapet and collapsed onto the tar paper surface. Rain lashed at her face, cold and stinging. She allowed herself 10 seconds. 10 seconds to close her eyes, to feel the burn in her lungs, to push away the image of Mark's face as the stuffing had burst from his chest. That was the worst part of the invasion. It wasn't blood anymore. When they got you, when the change took hold, you didn't bleed. You spilled. You spilled white cotton and polyester batting, and your skin turned soft, fuzzy, and vividly, horrifically colorful. "Get up," she hissed to herself. "Move or become a puppet." She scrambled to her feet, staying low. The roof offered a vantage point over Belltown. The streets below were a labyrinth of wreckage. Cars were overturned, not crashed, but tossed like toys in a toddler's tantrum. And everywhere there were the feathers, gray, oily pigeon feathers, drifting in wind drifts against the brickwork, clogging the gutters. They were the first sign that he was watching. The Pigeon King, the yellow one, Bert. Elena moved toward the north edge of the roof. To get to the needle, she had to navigate the gauntlet of the Seattle center. But first, she had to get to street level without attracting the grouches. She peered over the edge. The alleyway below was dark, shadowed by the looming bulk of a high-rise condo. She adjusted the straps of her backpack, a meager inventory of water, a flashlight with dying batteries, and a jagged length of rebar she'd sharpened against concrete. It wasn't much, but it was the only thing that could tear through the thick, felted hide of the entities. She took the fire escape down the other side, moving with agonizing slowness. As she descended, the smell hit her, a cloying, musty odor, like an attic that had been sealed for a century, mixed with the sharp tang of ammonia. It was the smell of him. Midway down, a window was shattered inward. The curtains, yellow with vertical stripes, flapped listlessly. Elena paused. A sound drifted from the darkness of the apartment, a rhythmic, monotonous humming. It sounded like a vacuum cleaner trying to sing a lullaby. Doing the pigeon. The melody was distorted, slowed down to a funeral dirge. Elena's heart hammered against her ribs. She tried to slide past the window, but her boot scraped against the metal grating. The humming stopped instantly. Silence. Absolute, heavy silence. Then, movement. Not a walk, but a slide. Something tall and rigid moved into the frame of the broken window. It was obscured by the shadows, but she saw the silhouette. The elongated head. The tuft of black hair sprouting like a fountain of crude oil from the top, and the eyes, perfectly round white spheres with pinpoint black pupils. They didn't blink, they didn't move, they just existed, fixing her with a gaze that felt like it was stripping the soul from her body. It was a drone, one of the tall ones. Elena didn't breathe. The drone stood there, a caricature of a man made of yellow fleece, wearing a sweater that mocked the concept of warmth. It tilted its head, a jerky, mechanical motion. Boring, it rasped. The voice was deep, nasal, and utterly devoid of emotion. This is boring. It raised a hand, a yellow mitten with 4 fingers. It pointed at her. Elena dropped. She didn't climb. She let go of the railing and free fell the last 10 feet to the dumpster below. She hit the garbage bags with a bone-jarring thud, rolling off onto the wet pavement just as the window above exploded. A paperclip, giant, jagged, made of twisted rebar, slammed into the spot where she had been standing a second ago. It embedded itself a foot deep into the asphalt, quivering like a spear. She scrambled up, ignoring the pain in her ankle, and sprinted. Behind her, a low, oscillating siren began to wail. It wasn't a mechanical siren. It was a voice, amplified and looped. Wah, 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 wah. The laughter, the terrible, joyless laughter of the short ones. Elena tore down 4th Avenue, weaving through the graveyard of vehicles. The Space Needle was closer now, its legs like the pillars of a temple, but the path was blocked. Ahead, near the intersection of Battery Street, a barricade had been erected. It wasn't made of rubble, it was made of books. Thousands of hardcover books, stacked with obsessive geometric precision, forming a wall 10 feet high. He loves order, she thought wildly. He hates the chaos. He's trying to tidy up the apocalypse. She looked for a way around. To her left, the glass front of a CVS pharmacy was blown out. She ducked inside. The interior was a chaotic mess of spilled pills and greeting cards, but the back exit might lead to the alley. She crunched over broken glass, her flashlight beam cutting a frantic swath through the gloom. Something moved in the greeting card aisle. Elena froze, raising the rebar. "Stay back," she warned, her voice trembling. A figure emerged from behind a rack of birthday cards. It was a man, or it had been. He was wearing a Seahawks jersey, torn and stained. But his face was half gone. Not torn away, but converted. The left side of his jaw had fused into orange foam. His eye was gone, replaced by a black plastic button that hung loosely by a thread. He clutched his stomach, where gray stuffing was leaking out like intestines. "Help me," the man gargled. His voice was thick, woolly. "I feel fuzzy." "I can't," Elena whispered, backing away. "I'm sorry." "He just stared at me," the man wept, the button eye clicking against his cheekbone. "He just stood there and stared, and I started to feel soft inside. My bones, they're turning into pipe cleaners." The man took a step toward her, his movements jerky, uncoordinated. His legs buckled, bending at odd angles, rubbery and boneless. He collapsed into a heap of limbs that looked too long, too flexible. He let out a final, wheezing breath that smelled of fabric softener, and then lay still. As Elena watched in horror, the transformation accelerated. His skin smoothed out, the pores vanishing, replaced by the texture of cheap felt. The Seahawks jersey melded into his body, becoming part of his skin. Elena turned and ran. She burst through the back door into the alley, gasping for air that didn't smell like laundry day. She couldn't save them. No one could save them. The stare was a virus. If Bert looked at you, really looked at you, reality bent. Biology surrendered to the aesthetic of a children's show from hell. She reached the perimeter of the Seattle Center. The devastation here was absolute. The International Fountain, once a centerpiece of joy, was now a pit of horrors. The water had been drained, replaced by a churning mass of pigeons. Thousands of them. They weren't flying. They were writhing, a sea of gray feathers and beady eyes. In the center of the fountain bowl, a statue had been erected. It was a giant, golden paperclip, reaching toward the sky. The needle was right there, just across the park, but the base was surrounded. Elena crouched behind the ruins of a food truck. She pulled out a pair of cracked binoculars she'd scavenged. The base of the Space Needle, the glass structure that housed the elevators, was lit from within by that sickly yellow glow. Guarding the entrance were the pigeon troopers. They were human-sized, bipedal birds, with stiff, unmoving wings, and heads that swiveled 360 degrees. They marched in perfect unison, their talons clicking on the concrete. Click-clack, click-clack. "How do I get in?" she whispered. She scanned the structure. The elevators were external. If she could get to the track, she could climb the maintenance rungs on the spine of the needle. But getting to the track meant crossing the open plaza, under the gaze of the pigeon troopers, and whatever occupied the observation deck. Thunder rumbled, shaking the ground. A bolt of lightning arced across the sky, illuminating the needle. For a split second she saw it. Up there on the halo, the walkway outside the observation deck. A silhouette, impossibly tall, thin as a rail, standing perfectly still, hands clasped behind its back. Bert. He was watching the storm. He was watching his city. Elena felt a wave of nausea. Even at this distance, the pressure of his existence was palpable. It was a crushing wave of annoy and judgment. He found humanity boring, messy, loud, and he was fixing it. She needed a distraction. She looked at her pack. She had a flare, but using it would give away her position instantly.
She looked at the sea of pigeons in the fountain. They were agitated, cooing in a low, harmonious drone. She remembered the lore, the old episodes. Bert loved pigeons, but he hated loud noises. He hated disruption. Elena grabbed a metal trash can lid lying in the mud. She took her rebar. She took a deep breath. "Sorry, Seattle," she muttered. She hurled the trash can lid like a frisbee toward the fountain. It sailed through the air, clanging loudly against a bronze nozzle in the center of the pit. Clang. The sound was sharp, dissonant. The sea of pigeons stopped moving instantly. 10,000 heads snapped toward the sound. Then, chaos. The birds erupted into a frenzy of screeching and flapping, a gray tornado rising from the pit. The pigeon troopers at the base of the needle broke formation, screeching, their heads spinning wildly as they tried to quell the riot. Now, Elena screamed internally. She broke cover. She sprinted across the Nestras, mud splashing up her legs. The distance was 200 yards. It felt like 200 miles. The air was thick with feathers, choking her, blinding her. She kept her eyes on the base of the needle's legs. A trooper turned, spotting her. It let out a sound that was half coo, half siren. It lunged, its beak snapping like a pair of industrial shears. Elena didn't stop. She swung the rebar with all her momentum, aiming for the creature's knees. Crack! The leg didn't break, it bent. It was made of stiff wire and stuffing. The trooper fell, flailing, its wings useless. Elena vaulted over it, her hand brushing against its feathers. They felt greasy and synthetic. She reached the steel support beam of the needle. The orange elevator car was high above, docked at the top, but the maintenance ladder was there, encased in a safety cage. She threw herself at it, her fingers hooking into the cold mesh. She began to climb. Below her, the plaza was a riot of noise. The troopers were firing, not bullets, but streams of boiling oatmeal from modified trombones. It splattered against the steel beam inches from her foot, searingly hot. Keep going. Don't look down. Don't look down. She climbed until her muscles burned, until the air grew thinner and colder. The sounds of the battle below faded, replaced by the howling wind. She was 100 feet up, 200. The city spread out below her, a grid of darkness and ruin. Then the speaker system of the Space Needle crackled to life. It wasn't a siren this time. It was a voice, dry, nasal, terrifyingly calm. "Elena," the voice droned. It echoed through the steel structure, vibrating against her chest. "Running is messy. Climbing is dangerous. Why not just sit? Sitting is good. Sitting is quiet." She froze. He knew her name. "I have a collection, Elena," Bert's voice continued, sounding like it was coming from inside her own head. "Paper clips, bottle caps, and now survivors. I need a new vertical stripe. You would fit perfectly." The elevator track beside her shuddered. She looked up. The orange elevator car was descending. It wasn't falling. It was coming down with purpose. And through the glass floor of the elevator, she could see a yellow light growing brighter. She scrambled faster, lungs screaming. She had to reach the maintenance hatch halfway up, the one that led into the mechanical core of the needle. The elevator was descending fast, a crushing weight of steel and glass coming to scrape her off the side of the building like a barnacle. Whirr! The mechanical hum of the elevator grew deafening. She saw the hatch, a small square panel 10 feet above her. She lunged, skipping rungs. The wind tried to tear her from the ladder. The elevator was 50 feet above her, 40. She reached the hatch, locked. No, no, no. She slammed the rebar against the handle. Rust flakes exploded into her eyes. The elevator was 20 feet above, a descending ceiling of doom. She could see him inside it now. He was pressing his face against the glass floor, the unibrow contorted in a frown of mild disapproval. She wedged the rebar into the wheel of the hatch and heaved. Her scream was lost in the wind. The metal shrieked. The lock snapped. She threw the hatch open and dove inside, just as the elevator roared past. The displacement of air nearly sucked her back out, pulling at her boots. She kicked wildly, scrambling into the dark, greasy crawlspace of the needle's leg, slamming the hatch shut behind her. Darkness. She lay there, panting, her heart rattling like a bird in a cage. She was inside the needle, Inside the belly of the beast, the space was cramped, filled with thick cables and hydraulic pumps. But it wasn't empty. From deeper in the tunnel, illuminated by the faint red glow of emergency lights, she saw writing on the walls. It was scratched into the metal, over and over again. E is for end, E is for end, E is for end. And sitting in the shadows, blocking her path upward, was a small rubber ducky. It sat perfectly still, staring at her. Elena gripped her rebar. "I hate rubber duckies," she whispered, her voice trembling with a mixture of fear and adrenaline. The ducky squeaked, not a normal squeak, a deep guttural sound. It began to grow, inflating like a balloon, its yellow plastic stretching, revealing rows of serrated teeth where a beak should be. Elena scrambled backward, but the tunnel behind her sealed shut with a wall of sudden dropping oatmeal. Trapped, she looked at the mutation in front of her. She looked at the cables overhead. She realized this wasn't just a building anymore. The Space Needle was a machine designed to broadcast the signal that was rewriting the world. To stop it, she had to go up. To go up, she had to get past the guardian of the bad. She tightened her grip on the rebar.
The ducky roared, a sound of wet rubber and rage. "Come on then," Elena screamed, charging forward into the red gloom. "Let's get this over with." The fight for the needle had just begun, and the higher she climbed, the quieter and deadlier it would get. The act was far from over. The ascent was the only way out, and the king on the observation deck was waiting, his paperclips sharpened, his patience thinning. She swung the weapon. The rebar connected, not with the clang of metal against solid matter, but with a wet, sucking thud. The yellow synthetic skin of the guardian indented, bowing inward like a crushed soda can, before rebounding with terrifying elasticity. The force of the blow sent a shockwave through the creature's gelatinous bulk, rippling through the layers of industrial rubber and the biological horrors stuffed beneath. The ducky didn't bleed, it leaked. A hiss of pressurized air and rancid bathwater sprayed from the impact site, smelling of mildew and old blood. The creature's jaw unhinged further, the serrated teeth, made of jagged, broken ceramic tile, grinding together. It lunged, a motion that defied physics, a sudden displacement of mass that slammed Elena against the curved wall of the utility shaft. The breath left her lungs in a pained wheeze. The oatmeal wall behind the creature was rising, a tidal wave of lumpy beige sludge that bubbled with the heat of 1,000 forgotten breakfasts. It was Ernie's chaos, snapping at her heels, threatening to drown her in the erratic, nonsensical warmth of the lower levels. But the ducky was the gatekeeper. Elena scrambled sideways as the beak snapped shut where her head had been a second prior, shattering a fuse box. Sparks showered down, illuminating the tunnel in strobe light flashes. In the darkness, the creature's eyes didn't reflect light, they absorbed it. Painted black pupils, wide and unblinking, fixed on her with the mindless predatory intent of a shark made of toys.
"Squeak," the creature vocalized, but the sound was wrong. It was a bass-heavy thrum that vibrated in Elena's molars, a frequency designed to liquefy bowels. She needed higher ground. The floor was becoming a swamp of rising sludge. She spotted a bundle of thick black coaxial cables dangling from a ruptured ceiling panel 10 feet up, the guts of the needle hanging loose. She jumped, her boots slipping on the slick metal grating, and hauled herself up the conduit shelving. The guardian roared again, slamming its bulk against the shelving. Metal screamed and buckled. Elena lost her footing, hanging by one hand from the cables. Below her, the rubber monstrosity opened its maw, waiting for the drop. Inside the gullet, she saw things that shouldn't exist, half-digested technicians, floating rubber balls, and the skeletal remains of pigeons. "Not today," she gritted out, swinging her legs. She kicked a heavy junction box loose from the wall. It swung on its conduit like a wrecking ball. With a grunt of exertion, she timed the swing. The heavy metal box smashed into the ducky's left eye. The plastic cracked. A spiderweb of fractures spread across the creature's face. The pressurized interior failed. With a sound like a jet engine depressurizing, the eye burst. The explosion of escaping gas and fluid threw Elena upward. She grabbed the overhead grate, her fingers bleeding, and hauled herself through the opening just as the tunnel below was consumed by the rising oatmeal tide. The ducky screams, a distorted looping track of a child's laughter slowed to a demonic baritone, faded as it was swallowed by the chaotic sludge of its master. Elena collapsed on the cold steel of the landing above, gasping for air. The air here was different. Gone was the humid maple syrup stench of the Ernie-infested lower levels. The transition was instant and jarring. The air in the midsection of the Space Needle was dry, arid. It smelled of ozone, dust, and old paper. It smelled of waiting.
She stood up, her legs trembling. She was in the service stairwell now, the spiral spine of the tower. She looked down. The grate she had climbed through was sealing itself, not with oatmeal, but with a sliding geometric iris of brushed steel. Click, lock, silence. Below was chaos. Above was order. Elena checked her weapon. The rebar was bent, coated in yellow slime that was rapidly hardening into a crust. She wiped it on her trousers and looked up. The stairs spiraled endlessly into the gloom, lit only by flickering fluorescent strips that buzzed with a rhythmic, headache-inducing frequency. Buzz, click, buzz, click. It was a metronome. She began to climb. The silence of the needle was heavier than the noise below. In the chaos of the city, you could react. Here, the silence demanded you behave. It demanded you sit still. It demanded you be boring. Step, step, step. The sound of her boots on the metal stairs was deafening. She tried to step softer, but the acoustics of the shaft amplified everything. It felt like she was violating a library. After 10 flights, the environment began to shift. The walls were no longer bare steel. They were lined with shelves. Thousands of them. Elena slowed, her flashlight beam cutting through the dusty air. She approached a shelf. It was lined with bottle caps, perfectly organized. Rows of red, then blue, then silver. Thousands of bottle caps, rusted and sharp, embedded into the metal of the shelf as if they had grown there. She looked closer. The caps weren't just sitting there, they were pinned. She recoiled. Underneath the caps, stretching across the shelf like a tablecloth, was human skin. Cured, dried, and stretched tight. The bottle caps were pinned into it, organized by size and color. A collection, she whispered, the horror rising in her throat. He's collecting. She kept moving, faster now. The walls became a blur of obsessive-compulsive madness. Collections of paper clips twisted into crude stick figures.
Collections of pigeon feathers arranged by length. Collections of teeth. Step, step, step. Something else was moving in the stairwell. Elena froze. She pressed her back against the cold wall, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. Above her, 3 flights up, came a sound. Scrape, pause, scrape, pause. It sounded like dry leaves being dragged across concrete, or heavy, matted wool. She extinguished her light. The darkness was absolute, save for the faint, sickly green glow of the emergency exit signs that seemed to pulse in time with the buzzing lights. Scrape, pause. It was coming down. Elena crouched, peering through the gap in the railing. She saw a shape descending. It was massive, filling the entire width of the stairwell. It didn't have feet, it slumped. It was a mound of brown, matted fur, ancient and dusty. 2 long trunk-like appendages dragged in front of it, feeling the stairs, tasting the air. It was a snuffle thing, but the whimsy was gone. This thing was a biological street sweeper, a creature of dust and stagnation. Its fur was matted with debris, broken glass, wire, dried fluids. It had no eyes that she could see, just those swaying trunks, sniffing for impurities, sniffing for life. It let out a sound, a long, mournful sigh that smelled of mothballs and decay. Elena realized with a jolt of terror that she was blocking its path. It was sweeping the stairs. If she stayed, she would be swept. She looked around frantically. The door to the 50th floor maintenance level was 10 feet below her. The handle was a simple lever. The creature was 2 flights up. Scrape. 1 flight up. The smell hit her. a suffocating cloud of dry rot. She could hear the wet snuffing sounds of the trunks suctioning against the metal steps. Elena moved. She vaulted the railing, dropping down to the landing below. The impact was loud. The scraping stopped. Silence.
Then a shriek, not from a mouth, but from the air itself, a high-pitched whistle of suction. The massive brown bulk surged forward, pouring over the railing above like a landslide of dirty carpet. Elena threw her shoulder against the maintenance door. It was locked. The snuffle thing hit the landing behind her, the floor groaning under its weight. A trunk thick as a tree and rough as sandpaper whipped out, wrapping around her ankle. It didn't squeeze, it dragged. It pulled her toward the central mass of fur. As she was hauled closer, she saw the fur part. There was no mouth. There was just a void. A black, static-filled hole that hummed with the sound of white noise. "No!" Elena screamed, twisting her body. She jammed the rebar into the floor grating, anchoring herself. The creature pulled, the dry wool stretching. She kicked out with her free boot, her heel connecting with something soft beneath the fur. The creature recoiled, the trunk loosening for a fraction of a second. Elena scrambled up, grabbed the door handle, and fired her pistol into the lock mechanism. The gunshot was thunderous in the confined space. The lock shattered. She kicked the door open and threw herself inside, slamming it shut just as the heavy mass of the creature slammed against it. The metal door bulged inward. The hinges screamed. Scrape. Scrape. It was scratching at the door. Slowly, methodically. It wasn't angry. It was just persistent. It had all the time in the world. Elena backed away, gun raised, breathing hard. She was in a hallway now, the maintenance level. But this wasn't a hallway. It was a pattern. The floor was tiled in black and white checks. The walls were striped vertically in gray and dark gray. The ceiling was low. And everywhere there were pigeons. Not real pigeons. They were taxidermy nightmares. Hundreds of them, perched on pipes, on light fixtures, on the floor. All of them facing the same way. All of them facing the elevator shaft at the end of the hall.
Elena took a step. A pigeon near her foot turned its head. Mechanical gears whirred softly. Its glass eyes clicked as they focused on her. "Coo," it said, but it was a recording, a human voice saying the word coo in a monotone. "Coo," said another. "Coo," said a third. The sound rippled down the hallway, a wave of apathy. Elena navigated the gauntlet of dead birds. The atmosphere here was thick with the psionic signal. She could feel it pressing against her temples. It made her want to stop. It made her want to straighten the crooked picture frame on the wall. It made her want to organize the bullets in her magazine by size. Fight it, she told herself. Chaos is life. Order is death. She reached the elevator shaft. The doors were pried open, revealing the abyss. The cable stretched upward into darkness, vibrating with tension. She looked up. Far above, in the halo of the needle, a blue light pulsed. The source. There was no car. She would have to climb the maintenance ladder inside the shaft. As she stepped onto the ladder, the static in her head grew louder. A voice, dry and nasally, cut through the white noise. It wasn't shouting, it was lecturing. "Elena, you're making a mess. We don't like messes, do we? Bert. Look at you, running, sweating. It's so undignified. Why don't you just stay there? I have a lovely collection of paper clips I'd like to show you. They are fascinating. The curve of the metal, the uniformity." "Go to hell," she muttered, climbing. Her muscles burned. The air grew thinner. "Hell is just a place with no filing system," the voice droned. "I am fixing it. I am fixing everything. Ernie was messy. He was loud, but I fixed him. I put him in the basement where the noise belongs. Now it's quiet time." The ladder vibrated. Elena looked down. The darkness below was shifting.
"Did you know," Bert's voice continued, echoing from the speakers mounted every 10 feet in the shaft, "that a pigeon's heart beats 600 times a minute? That's too fast. I fixed that too." Above her, a hatch opened. Elena froze. She was 50 feet below the observation deck sublevel. From the open hatch, something fell. It wasn't a bomb. It was a paperclip. It pinged off her shoulder. Then another. Then a handful. Then a rain of steel. Thousands of sharpened, heavy-gauge steel wires rained down the shaft. Elena swung under the ladder, pressing herself against the concrete wall, shielding her head with her pack. The metal rain clattered against the rungs, sparking as they hit the elevator rails. It was a shrapnel storm of office supplies. "W is for wounded," the voice intoned. A large hooked piece of metal, the giant letter W made of rebar, plummeted past her, missing her by inches and severing the safety cage of the ladder below. Elena scrambled up. She had to move between the waves of debris. She reached the sub-level grating. It was welded shut. Of course. She looked at the mechanism. It was a puzzle lock. 3 dials. Primary colors. "You have to solve the puzzle, Elena. We can't let just anyone in. It wouldn't be proper." Elena looked at the dials. Red, green, blue. "Think," she hissed. "Bert. He hates Ernie. He hates noise. He loves oatmeal? No, he hates oatmeal. He loves pigeons. He loves the number 6. She spun the dials. The mechanism ground against rust and dried paste. She set them all to 666? No, too cliché. She remembered the broadcast she'd heard days ago. Today is brought to you by the number 0. She spun them all to 0. Blank. Nothing. The void. Clack. The grate released. She pushed it open and hauled herself onto the floor of the observation deck's machinery room. The noise was deafening here. Not the noise of chaos, but the noise of the machine. Giant gears, painted a dull gray, turned slowly.
Pistons the size of tree trunks pumped up and down, driving the signal array above. But the pistons weren't steam-powered. Elena walked through the forest of machinery. She found the power source. In the center of the room, hooked up to electrodes and intravenous tubes, were the captives. Hundreds of people, stripped and shaved, their heads connected by wires to a central pylon. They were sitting in rows of school desks. Their eyes were taped open. In front of them, a massive screen played a single image on a loop, a pigeon pecking at a crumb, over and over. The people weren't screaming, they were humming, a low, monotonous drone that powered the transmitter. They were being bored to death, and their boredom was being harvested as energy. Elena felt a wave of nausea. This was the battery, the ultimate stagnation. She raised her weapon to smash the console, to free them, but a shadow detached itself from the machinery. It wasn't Bert, not yet. It was a construct, a golem made of gray office carpet and filing cabinets, shaped vaguely like a man. Its head was a rotary phone. It lunged at her, swinging a fist made of solidified epoxy. Elena rolled, the fist smashing into the floor where she had stood, cracking the concrete. She fired her pistol, the bullets sparking off the metal cabinets that made up its chest. "Please hold," the phone head spoke, its voice a garbled synthesis of automated customer service lines. "Your call is important to us." It swung again. Elena ducked under the arm and jammed her rebar into the joint of its knee. She twisted. Metal screeched. The golem stumbled. She didn't try to kill it. She ran. She sprinted past the rows of humming victims, past the throbbing machinery, toward the spiral stairs that led to the final level, the halo. The wait time is infinity,
the golem roared, pursuing her with a limping, clanking gait. Elena hit the stairs. These were different. Glass, suspended over nothing. She climbed into the light.
The wind hit her first. She was outside, or at least on the enclosed observation deck. The glass walls of the Space Needle offered a panoramic view of Seattle, but Seattle was gone. The city below was a grid. The ruins had been bulldozed and rearranged into perfect gray squares. No trees, no curves, just blocks of silence. And standing in the center of the observation deck, looking out at his creation, was the king. He was tall, impossibly tall. His body was elongated, stretched like taffy. He wore a suit that seemed to be cut from the fabric of the night sky, dark, void-like, with faint vertical stripes of static. His head was the shape of a lemon, high and conical. The unibrow was a jagged crown of black obsidian fused to his yellow skull. His nose was a long, drooping beak of flesh. He didn't turn around. He held his hands behind his back. "Elena," he said. His voice didn't come from his mouth. It came from the glass walls. It came from the sky. "You didn't wipe your feet." Elena raised her gun, aiming at the back of his head. "Turn it off, Bert. Turn it all off." Bert turned slowly. His face was a mask of tragedy. The vertical pupils of his eyes were thin slits. "Off?" he asked, tilting his head. "Why would I turn it off? The broadcast is finally clear. Do you hear it?" He gestured to the city below. No honking horns, no shouting, no laughter. Just peace. "I have organized the world, Elena. I have put everything in its box." He took a step toward her. The floor vibrated. "And you," he whispered, a paperclip extending from his fingertip like a claw, glinting in the pale light. "You are a loose thread. You are a crooked line." Elena backed up, but her back hit the glass. "I'm going to file you away," Bert said, his mouth opening to reveal rows of neatly filed metallic teeth. Under D for dead. Elena triggered the detonator she had stolen from the maintenance level, the one she hadn't had time to set properly. She just held it.
"I'm not a file," she spat. "I'm the shredder." The glass beneath them began to crack as the frequency of the tower shifted. Bert's eyes widened, the first sign of emotion he had shown. "Don't," he warned, his voice dropping to a demonic growl. "You'll break the symmetry." "Good," Elena said, and she pressed the button. The explosion was not a roar, but a sharp, concussive snap, like a titan breaking a dry bone. The silence Bert had so carefully curated, the heavy, suffocating stillness of the observation deck, shattered instantly. For a microsecond, the world hung in suspension. The glass floor, a spiderweb of structural failure, held its shape against gravity just long enough for Elena to see the horror fracture in Bert's eyes. It wasn't fear of death. It was the absolute agonizing revulsion of mess. "No," he mouthed, the word lost in the squeal of twisting metal. "The filing system." Then the floor gave way. Elena didn't scream with them, glittering diamonds in the pale, overcast light, raining down like a jagged confetti parade. She tumbled, the wind roaring in her ears, the centrifugal force of the explosion throwing her wide. Below, the city rushed up to meet her, a grid of muted grays and blacks, terrifyingly organized. But she wasn't falling alone. Bert was there. He fell with the stiff, rigid posture of a man descending an escalator, despite the fact that he was plummeting 500 feet. He didn't flail. His suit jacket flapped violently, but his limbs remained tucked, straight, efficient. He looked like a dart aimed at the heart of the city. As Elena spun, catching glimpses of the approaching concrete, she saw Bert adjust his trajectory.
He extended an arm, his fingers elongating, the skin stretching and turning translucent, revealing the metallic armature beneath. He snagged a passing cable,
one of the thick steel support wires of the needle's lower structure. With a sound like a buzzsaw hitting a pipe, he swung around, his momentum arrested with jarring force. He didn't climb, he simply integrated. His hand seemed to fuse with the cable, the metal of the needle becoming an extension of his own physiology. Elena slammed into the slanted roof of the lower halo level. The impact knocked the world into a kaleidoscope of black and white stars. She rolled, bone grating on composite roofing, sliding uncontrollably toward the edge. Her fingers scrabbled against the smooth, cold surface, nails tearing, seeking friction where there was none. Bert had polished even the roof. Everything was frictionless, dust-free, perfect. She hit a gutter, squared off, perfectly 90 degrees, and the breath hitched back into her throat with a jagged sob. Alive. Broken, maybe, but alive. High above, the rest of the debris rained down, a cascade of glass and steel crashing into the parking lots and gardens of the Seattle Center below. But Elena didn't look up. She looked at the cable. Bert was descending. He didn't slide. He walked down the vertical steel rope, his shoes engaging with the metal with magnetic precision. Click, click, click. He was inverted, walking perpendicular to the ground, defying gravity through sheer bureaucratic will. His face was a mask of cold fury, his glasses cracked but still perfectly level on his nose. That was, Bert's voice projected, seemingly coming from the Space Needle's PA system rather than his throat, echoing across the entire complex, an unauthorized demolition. You have created a significant amount of paperwork, Elena. Elena scrambled over the edge of the gutter, dropping the remaining 10 feet to the walkway of the lower level.
Her ankle screamed in protest, a hot wire of pain shooting up her leg. She limped, half running, half falling toward the elevators. But the elevators were gone. In their place were smooth steel walls. No buttons, no seams. Access denied, the building whispered. It was Bert's voice, vibrating through the floorboards. She abandoned the core and ran for the stairs, bursting through the heavy fire door. The stairwell was not a stairwell anymore. The stairs had been flattened. It was a smooth 45-degree ramp, polished to a mirror sheen. Efficiency, the voice boomed, rattling the fluorescent lights overhead. Stairs cause pauses, ramps encourage flow. Elena didn't hesitate. She sat and slid, the friction burning the denim of her jeans. She plummeted down the spiral ramp, the speed terrifying, the walls blurring. She was a package in a chute, being sorted. That's what this was. He had turned the Space Needle into a sorting facility. She shot out of the bottom exit at a lethal speed, tumbling across the polished concrete of the ground floor lobby. She crashed into a reception desk, the wood splintering, not naturally, but breaking into perfect geometric cubes. Elena gasped for air, pulling herself up. She was on the ground level. The glass doors to the outside stood open. She stumbled out into the Seattle air. And then she stopped. From the top of the needle, the city had looked peaceful. From the ground, it was a nightmare of geometry. The trees of the Seattle Center had not just been pruned, they had been mathematically resolved. Branches were woven into perfect grids. Leaves were stacked in piles by color: yellow, brown, decaying green. The grass was not a lawn, it was a green carpet, vacuumed so the fibers all leaned south. And the silence. It wasn't the silence of emptiness, it was the silence of repression. Elena. The ground shook. Not an earthquake, but a rhythmic impact. She turned back toward the needle. Bert had reached the ground.
He landed in a three-point stance, the pavement cracking beneath him into a perfect circle. He stood up, dusting off his lapels. He looked at the pile of shattered glass from the observation deck, the mess she had made. He twitched, his neck jerked to the side, a mechanical tick. "The cleanup," he murmured, his voice sounding wet and grinding. "The resource allocation required to fix this, it disrupts the quarterly projection." He looked at her, and for the first time the human facade truly slipped.
his jaw unhinged, dropping to his chest, revealing not a throat, but a dark, rotating cylinder of shredder blades. His eyes rolled back, replaced by the glowing red LEDs of a standby light. "You are a redundancy," Bert shrieked, the sound a mix of human scream and fax machine dial-up screech. "Liquidate." Elena ran. She sprinted past the Mopop Museum, or what used to be the museum. The chaotic, colorful curves of the building had been hammered flat. It was now a gray, rectangular block labeled Archive 01. She needed a weapon. She needed chaos. But there was nothing. No loose bricks, no stray trash cans. The trash cans were welded shut. The bricks were fused. She heard the skittering behind her. It sounded like 1,000 pens scratching on paper, amplified to a deafening volume. She risked a glance back. Bert was no longer walking. He had dropped to all fours. His limbs had lengthened, composed of interlocking staplers and hole-punch mechanisms. He moved like a spider made of office supplies, his movements jerky but horrifyingly fast. Every time his hands touched the pavement, they left a stamp mark in red ink. Void. "I have a spot for you," Bert called out, his voice giddy and distorted. "Row 4, Shelf B, Box 12. It's perfectly your size. We just need to fold you a little." Elena ducked into the shadow of the Pacific Science Center arches. She needed to break his line of sight. She needed to think. Why had he kept her alive this long?
Why bring her to the needle? He needs consent, she realized. He needs the form signed. Even in his madness, Bert was bound by the rules of bureaucracy. He couldn't just kill her. He had to process her. That's why he had been talking about filing her. That's why he hadn't just sniped her from a distance. He needed to physically interact with the document. She saw the Science Center ponds. They were drained, dry, and filled with people. Elena clapped a hand over her mouth to stifle a scream. They weren't dead. They were standing in rows, shoulder to shoulder, eyes open, staring blankly ahead. They were dressed in identical gray jumpsuits. They didn't blink. They didn't breathe visibly. They were in storage. "Don't worry about them," Bert's voice whispered right in her ear. She spun around, swinging her fist. She hit nothing but air. Bert was clinging to the archway above her, hanging upside down like a bat. His tie hung straight down, defying gravity, stiff as a board. "They are pending review," Bert smiled. His teeth now rows of silver staples. "Pending is a peaceful state, Elena. No decisions, no stress, just waiting." He dropped. Elena rolled forward, dodging his grasping claws. His hand struck the concrete where she had been standing, shattering it. He roared in frustration, pulling a ream of paper from his sleeve and throwing it at her. The paper flew with the velocity of shrapnel, slicing her cheek, embedding into the wall behind her. "Sign it," he screamed. "Sign the release." Elena scrambled over the low wall into the dry pond, landing among the stored people. "Excuse me," she gasped, pushing past a man who looked like a barista she used to know. He didn't move. He felt cold and stiff like a mannequin. "Move, please, move." They were heavy, rooted to the spot. Bert was coming over the wall, his movements fluid and oily. "You're disturbing the inventory," Bert bellowed, his voice rising to an air raid siren pitch.
"Do not touch the assets!" Elena realized the weakness. Order. He needed order. She didn't run away from the crowd. She pushed into the center of them. She grabbed the barista man by the shoulders and shoved him with all her might. He tipped. He fell into the woman next to him. She fell into the teenager next to her. Dominoes. The perfection of the grid worked against Bert. The density was too high. As one fell, they all began to fall. The silent, standing army collapsed into a heap of tangled limbs and gray fabric. "No!" Bert screeched, halting his advance. He looked at the pile of people, his hands twitching. "Disorder! Mixing of SKUs! This is unacceptable!" He lunged, not at Elena, but at the pile. He began frantically grabbing people, trying to stand them back up, trying to straighten their rows. "Stay in your lane! Maintain the grid!" Elena scrambled out of the pond on the far side. She had bought seconds, maybe a minute. She ran toward the monorail track. The pillars were thick, concrete. She saw a maintenance hatch at the base of one. It was welded shut, of course. Everything was sealed. She looked around desperately. She needed fire. Fire was the ultimate destroyer, but there was nothing to burn. The city was concrete and steel. Then she remembered the detonator in her pocket, the one she had used to blow the glass floor. It was a remote blasting unit she'd stolen from the construction crews before the Great Filing. It usually had a secondary charge, a failsafe. She pulled it out. The casing was cracked, the wires exposed. Behind her, the sounds of Bert's panic were changing. The frantic scuffling was stopping. A low thrumming bass note began to vibrate through the soles of her shoes. She turned. Bert was done trying to fix the people. He was standing atop the pile of bodies, absorbing them. He wasn't eating them, he was collating them. The gray jumpsuits were merging into his mass. He was growing.
He was becoming a tower of gray bureaucracy, a golem of flesh and fabric. He was 20 feet tall now, a hulking shape that looked like a man viewed through a shattered lens. "You cannot create a mess I cannot file," the giant Bert thing boomed. His voice was no longer singular. It was a chorus of the thousands he had absorbed. "We are the institution. You are the error." He took a step, and the ground cracked. He raised a massive hand, and the concrete of the monorail track above Elena groaned. He was manipulating the infrastructure itself. Rebar shot out of the ground like spears, forming a cage around Elena. "Containment," Bert droned. "Isolation protocol initiated." Elena was trapped. The bars were thick, rusted iron. The cage was shrinking, the bars moving inward, compressing the space. Bert leaned down, his massive face filling the sky. His eyes were windows into a sterile white room. "Last chance, Elena. Submit to the archive. We have a lovely spot in the basement. It's quiet, so very quiet." Elena looked at the detonator. She looked at the giant looming face of order. "You forgot one thing about filing, Bert," she said, her voice shaking but loud. Bert paused, his massive head tilting. "And what is that?" "Paper burns." She jammed the exposed wires of the detonator into the battery pack, sparking a short. She didn't throw it at him. She threw it at the monorail pillar next to her, specifically at the high-voltage junction box that Bert's terraforming had exposed near the base. The spark met the transformer. It wasn't a chemical explosion. It was an electrical cascade. A blinding arc of blue-white energy erupted from the pillar. But it didn't just shock the air. It followed the path of least resistance. And in Bert's perfectly organized, interconnected city, everything was connected. The bolt jumped to the rebarcade. It jumped to the wet, conductive mass of the Bert golem. Bert screamed. It was the sound of 1,000,000 hard drives crashing at once.
The electricity surged through him, and because he was connected to the grid, because he was the grid, it backfired into the city. The streetlights exploded. The archive buildings flashed and smoked. The perfectly synchronized traffic lights burst into showers of sparks. The Bert golem convulsed. The filed people comprising his body began to fall away, the magnetic binding holding them together failing. He was disintegrating, not into dust, but into chaos. "System failure," the chorus of voices wailed. "Corrupt data. Abort, abort." The cage around Elena lost power, and the rebar slackened, bending under its own weight. She squeezed through the gap, heat searing her skin. The giant form of Bert collapsed. It was a landslide of gray bodies and office supplies. The center of the mass, the core Bert, writhed on the pavement. He was human-sized again, but stripped of his suit. He was a naked, shivering thing made of pale, raw skin, covered in burns that looked like redact lines. Elena walked up to him. The air smelled of ozone and burnt hair. Bert looked up at her. He was weeping, but his tears were thick black ink. "It's all wrong," he sobbed, clawing at the disorganized cracks in the pavement. "The lines, they aren't straight." He reached for a loose pebble, trying to place it in line with another pebble. His hands shook too much. He couldn't do it. The control was gone. Elena picked up a piece of jagged metal, a shard from the Space Needle that had fallen all this way. It was heavy, sharp, and utterly irregular. She stood over him. "You wanted to file me under D," she said softly. Bert looked at the shard. He flinched, terrified of the jagged edge. "Please, round the corners. It's a safety hazard." Elena dropped the shard, not on him, but next to him. Then she reached into her pocket and pulled out a single crumpled, dirty receipt she had found days ago, a piece of trash. She let it flutter down. It landed on his chest. Bert stared at it.
A piece of trash, unfiled, unsorted, touching him. He began to hyperventilate. His eyes darted around, seeing the smoke, the debris, the waking people groaning in the dry ponds. The perfect order was gone. The symmetry was broken. I can't organize this," he whispered, his voice fading. "It's too much data." His eyes rolled back. His body went rigid, locked in a permanent kernel panic. He wasn't dead, but he was rebooting, a reboot that would take an eternity in a world that would never be clean again. Elena stepped back. The people in the ponds were starting to stand up. They looked confused, rubbing their heads, blinking as if waking from a long dream. The gray jumpsuits were staining with soot and dirt. It was messy. It was loud. Someone started crying. Someone else shouted a name. Elena took a deep breath. The air tasted of smoke and rain. She looked at the Space Needle, now a decapitated stalk against the gray sky, smoke pouring from its summit. It was ugly. It was broken. "Good," she whispered. She turned her back on the frozen, catatonic form of Bert and walked into the beautiful, chaotic, disorganized crowd. She had work to do. There was a whole city to mess up.